The sound of splintering wood and screaming horses shattered the afternoon silence as Quinn Holbrook urged his bay mare down the rocky canyon trail, his heart hammering against his ribs when he spotted the overturned stagecoach wedged between two massive boulders 30 feet below. Smoke rose from one of the wheels still spinning uselessly in the air, and the acrid smell of burnt wood filled his nostrils as he dismounted and scrambled down the treacherous slope, his boots sliding on loose scree. The year was 1873, and Quinn had been riding through southern Utah's red rock country for 3 weeks, delivering a herd of cattle to a ranch outside Circleville, when fate or providence led him to this exact spot at this exact moment. Bodies lay scattered among the wreckage, and Quinn's stomach turned as he checked each one, finding the driver with his neck twisted at an impossible angle, a well-dressed businessman crushed beneath a trunk, and an elderly woman who had clearly died on impact. Then he heard it, a soft moan coming from beneath the coach itself, and he dropped to his knees, peering into the shadows. A woman lay pinned there, her green traveling dress torn and dusty, dark auburn hair spilling across her pale face, and her eyes, when they fluttered open, were the color of whiskey held up to lamplight. "Hold on," Quinn said, his voice rough from days of little conversation with anyone but his horse. "I am going to get you out." She tried to speak but only managed a whimper of pain, and Quinn assessed the situation with the practiced eye of a man who had lived through his share of trouble. The coach had her trapped from the waist down, but from what he could see, she was not bleeding heavily. He braced his shoulder against the wooden frame and pushed with everything he had, muscles straining, sweat breaking out across his forehead despite the cool November air. The coach shifted an inch, then 2, and the woman cried out. "I know it hurts," Quinn grunted, "but I have to move it to free you." With one final heave, the coach lifted just enough for her to drag herself forward, and Quinn caught her before she could collapse completely. He carried her up the slope to level ground, laying her gently on a patch of dried grass near where his horse waited patiently. Her face was deathly white, and when he carefully examined her legs, he found her left ankle twisted at a sickening angle, clearly broken, along with several deep gashes across her shins where the wood had torn through her stockings. "What is your name?" Quinn asked, pulling his canteen from his saddle and lifting her head to help her drink. "Kira," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Kira Owens." "Well, Miss Owens, you are alive, which is more than can be said for the others. I am Quinn Holbrook, and I am going to take care of you." Her eyes focused on him properly for the first time, taking in his weathered face, the stubble covering his jaw, the concerned blue eyes that seemed startlingly gentle in such a rugged face. "The others," she said, and tears began to streak through the dust on her cheeks. "Mrs. Patterson, she was so kind to me, and the driver, he told me stories about his grandchildren." "I am sorry," Quinn said simply, because there was nothing else to say. Death was a companion in this country, always lurking just beyond the next bend in the trail. He worked quickly as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, fashioning a splint for her ankle from branches and strips torn from his spare shirt, cleaning her wounds with water and whiskey that made her gasp and grip his forearm hard enough to leave marks. When he was finished, he sat back on his heels and studied her in the fading light. She could not have been more than 23 or 24, with a face that would have been beautiful even without the pain etched across it, and something in her eyes spoke of intelligence and strength beneath the current vulnerability. "Can you ride?" he asked. Kira looked at the horse and then at her useless leg. "I do not think I have much choice." Quinn almost smiled at that. Most women he knew would have dissolved into hysterics by now, but Kira Owens seemed to be made of sterner stuff. He lifted her carefully onto his mare, then swung up behind her, one arm wrapped securely around her waist to keep her steady. She sagged back against his chest, and he could feel her trembling, though whether from shock, cold, or pain he could not say. "Where were you headed?" he asked as they started down the trail at a careful walk. "Circleville," she said. "I was going to be a teacher there. The town council hired me through correspondence. I am from Pennsylvania originally, but after my father died last year, there was nothing left for me back east. My mother passed when I was young, and I have no siblings. The West seemed like a place for new beginnings. Circleville is still a good day's ride from here, and you need a doctor before you go anywhere else. There is a small settlement about 2 hours north, just a trading post and a few houses, but old Doc Morrison lives there. He can patch you up proper." The ride through the gathering darkness tested every ounce of Quinn's skill as a horseman and every ounce of Kira's endurance. She bit her lip until it bled rather than cry out when the horse stumbled over rough ground, and Quinn found himself admiring her courage even as he wished he could spare her the pain. He talked to distract her, telling her about the country they were passing through, about the cattle drive that had brought him this way, about growing up on a small ranch in Colorado before his parents died of fever and left him to make his own way in the world at 18. "How old are you now?" Kira asked, her voice tight with suppressed agony. 27, Quinn said. "Been on my own for 9 years, working ranches, driving cattle, doing whatever pays. Never had much reason to settle down anywhere permanent." "That sounds lonely." The simple observation caught Quinn off guard. "I suppose it is," he admitted, "but it is the life I know." They reached the settlement just as full dark descended, and Quinn pounded on Doc Morrison's door until a grizzled man in his 60s appeared, holding a lamp high. His irritation vanished when he saw Kira's condition, and within minutes, she was laid out on his examining table while Quinn paced in the outer room, listening to her muffled cries as the doctor set her broken ankle. When Morrison finally emerged, wiping his hands on a towel, he shook his head. "That young woman has a world of hurt in her, but she will heal. The ankle was a clean break, and I got it set proper. The cuts will scar but should not fester if we keep them clean. She needs rest, at least a week before she should even think about traveling, and even then she cannot walk on that foot for a good 6 weeks. "Where can she stay?" Quinn asked, already knowing the answer would complicate his life considerably. Morrison shrugged. "My wife died 3 years back, and I do not have room to take in patients anymore. The trading post has a room they rent sometimes, but it is no place for an injured woman alone. Most folks around here would help, but everyone has their own troubles this time of year, getting ready for winter." Quinn closed his eyes and made a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. "I will look after her." "You," Morrison raised an eyebrow, "you planning to stay in the area?" "I was supposed to head back to Colorado after delivering those cattle, but I suppose that can wait." "Is there anywhere around here I can set up camp for a week or so?" "There is an old line shack about a mile from here. Belongs to the Thornton Ranch, but nobody uses it this time of year. I can ask if you can stay there. It is rough, but it has a roof and a stove." Quinn nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. He had rescued Kira Owens from that wreckage, and now her welfare was his burden to bear, at least until she was well enough to continue to Circleville. The fact that something in him wanted to take on that burden, wanted to be the one to see her through this, was something he was not quite ready to examine too closely. Morrison went back into the room where Kira lay, and Quinn followed. She looked even smaller and more fragile in the lamplight, her auburn hair spread across the pillow, her face still pale but with more color than before. Her eyes found his immediately, "Thank you," she said softly. "I do not know how I can ever repay you for saving my life." Quinn felt something shift in his chest, a sensation he had not experienced in longer than he cared to remember. "No repayment needed. I just happened to be in the right place." "Or maybe you were meant to find me," Kira said, and then her eyes widened slightly, as if she had not intended to speak the thought aloud. "I mean, it seems like more than coincidence." Quinn moved closer to the table, looking down at her. In the warm glow of the lamp, he could see flecks of green in her brown eyes, could see the delicate bone structure beneath the bruises already forming on her face. "Maybe I was meant to find you broken," he heard himself say, the words coming from somewhere deep inside, "so I could be the one to help put you back together." The room fell silent except for the ticking of Morrison's clock on the mantel. Kira stared up at Quinn, and something passed between them, an understanding or recognition that neither could name but both felt in their bones. Morrison cleared his throat awkwardly, breaking the spell. "Well, I will go talk to Thornton about that line shack," he said, grabbing his coat. "You two sort out the details." After the doctor left, Quinn pulled a chair close to the table and sat down. "I know this is not ideal," he said. "You do not know me, and I am asking you to trust me to take care of you in an isolated cabin for a week or more. If you would rather stay here in the settlement, I will figure something else out." Kira was quiet for a moment, studying his face. Quinn made himself meet her gaze steadily, letting her see whatever she needed to see. Finally, she spoke. "You saved my life today. You could have ridden past that wreckage, could have left me there to die, but you did not. You carried me up that slope, you set my broken bones, you rode for hours with me in your arms so I could get help. I do not think you are the kind of man who would hurt a helpless woman." "I am not," Quinn said firmly. "I give you my word on that." "Then I will trust you, Quinn Holbrook. I do not have many other options, but even if I did, I think I would still choose to trust you." Something warm bloomed in Quinn's chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. He reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "I will take good care of you, Kira. I promise." Morrison returned an hour later with good news. The Thorntons had agreed to let them use the line shack, and his wife had stocked it with basic supplies before she passed. So there were blankets, canned goods, and firewood already there. At first light, Quinn would take Kira there and begin the long process of helping her heal. That night, Kira slept in Morrison's spare bed, dosed with laudanum for the pain, while Quinn kept watch in a chair beside her. He told himself he was just being cautious, making sure she did not develop a fever or take a turn for the worse, but the truth was he simply did not want to leave her side. Every time she stirred or whimpered in her sleep, he was there, adjusting her blankets or dampening a cloth to cool her forehead. As the first gray light of dawn crept through the window, Quinn studied Kira's sleeping face and wondered what twist of fate had brought them together. He had been alone for so long, moving from place to place with no roots and no attachments, and he had told himself that was how he liked it. But sitting here watching this brave, beautiful woman breathe, he felt the first cracks forming in the armor he had built around his heart. Morrison checked Kira's bandages at sunrise and declared her fit to be moved, though he warned Quinn to keep her leg elevated and change the dressings twice a day. Quinn borrowed a bugboard from the trading post, padding the bed with blankets and straw to make it as comfortable as possible, then carefully lifted Kira and settled her in the back. She was more alert this morning, though clearly still in considerable pain, and she gripped the sides of the wagon with white knuckles as they jolted along the rough track to the line shack. The cabin was small but sturdy, built of rough-hewn logs with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. There was a single room with a narrow bed in one corner, a table and 2 chairs, a small stove, and not much else. Quinn carried Kira inside and laid her on the bed, then set about building a fire to chase away the morning chill. Within an hour, he had water boiling for coffee and was frying salt pork and beans in a pan. Kira watched him work from the bed, and when he brought her a plate of food, she smiled for the first time since the accident. "You are quite domestic for a cowboy," Quinn grinned. A man learns to cook when the alternative is starving. It is not fancy, but it is hot and it will fill your belly. They ate in companionable silence, and then Quinn helped Kira sit up more comfortably, propping her injured leg on a rolled blanket. She looked around the small space with what seemed like satisfaction rather than dismay. "It is cozy," she said. "I grew up in a big house in Philadelphia, all formal parlors and servants and stuffy dinner parties. My father was a banker, very concerned with appearances and social standing. This is different, but not in a bad way." "What made you decide to come west and teach?" Quinn asked, settling into one of the chairs with his own coffee. Kira was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the rough wool blanket. "After my mother died when I was 10, my father threw himself into his work and more or less forgot I existed. I was raised by governesses and tutors, taught to be a proper lady who could play piano and embroider and make polite conversation, but not much else. When he died last year, I discovered that the bank was on the verge of failure and he had debts I never knew about. Everything had to be sold to pay his creditors, and I was left with almost nothing." Her voice was steady, but Quinn could hear the pain beneath the words. "That must have been hard." "It was freeing in a way," Kira said. "I realized I could finally make my own choices. I had trained as a teacher, more as a hobby than anything else, but it turned out to be the one skill I had that was actually useful. When I saw the advertisement for a teaching position in Circleville, Utah, it seemed like a sign. A chance to start over, to be someone other than the poor little rich girl whose father left her penniless." Quinn thought about his own losses, his own new beginnings, and felt a kinship with this woman that went beyond the circumstances that had thrown them together. "We are both starting over then. Maybe that is what we were meant to find in each other." Kira met his eyes, and the air between them seemed to thicken with possibility. Maybe so. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both strange and natural to Quinn. He spent his mornings hunting or riding to the trading post for supplies, his afternoons doing odd jobs around the cabin and caring for Kira, his evenings talking with her by firelight. She was easy to talk to, with a quick mind and a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh more than he had in years. They discussed everything from books to politics to their dreams for the future, and Quinn found himself sharing things he had never told another living soul. "I always thought I would have land of my own someday," he admitted one evening about 4 days into their stay at the cabin. "Not a huge ranch, just enough to run a decent herd and maybe grow some hay, a place that was mine that nobody could take away." "What is stopping you?" Kira asked. She was sitting up in bed, her ankle still splinted but the swelling starting to go down, color returning to her cheeks as she healed. Quinn shrugged. "Money mostly. Land is not cheap and cattle even less so. I have been saving, but it is slow going when you are just working for wages." "It sounds like a good dream," Kira said softly. "A place to put down roots, to build something lasting. What about you? Do you really want to spend your life teaching other people's children in a small Utah town?" Kira looked toward the window, where the last rays of sunset painted the sky orange and pink. "I want to matter," she said finally. "I want my life to mean something, to make a difference somehow. Teaching seems like a way to do that. But if I am honest, what I really want is a family of my own. Children to love, a husband who sees me as a partner, not just an ornament, a home where I belong. The longing in her voice resonated deep in Quinn's chest. Without thinking, he moved from his chair to sit on the edge of the bed, close enough that he could take her hand in his. You already matter, Kira. Any man would be lucky to build a life with you. She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. Would you? She asked, so quietly he almost missed it. Quinn's heart began to pound. They had only known each other for 4 days, and most of that time she had been injured and dependent on him. This was not how things like this were supposed to happen. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw the same certainty he felt in his own heart, the recognition that sometimes fate moved faster than caution would recommend. Yes, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I would count myself the luckiest man alive. Kira's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling as she reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his stubbled jaw. This is crazy. We barely know each other. I know, Quinn said, leaning into her touch, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life. From the moment I found you in that wreckage, something changed. It was like I had been sleepwalking through my life and you woke me up. He leaned closer, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but instead she tilted her face up to his. Their lips met softly at first, a tentative exploration, then with growing confidence and heat. Quinn cupped the back of her head, threading his fingers through her hair, and Kira made a small sound of pleasure that shot straight through him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. I am falling in love with you, he whispered. I know it is too soon and too fast, but I cannot help it. It does not feel too fast, Kira whispered back. It feels like I have been waiting my whole life to meet you. They spent that evening wrapped in each other's arms, trading kisses and whispered confessions, making plans that would have seemed impossible just days before. Quinn told her about his savings, enough for a down payment on a small piece of land if they were careful. Kira told him about her teaching contract in Circleville, how she was supposed to start at the beginning of December, but was clearly going to be late now. They decided together that Quinn would take her to Circleville when she was well enough to travel. She would honor her commitment to teach at least through the spring, and they would spend that time getting to know each other properly before making any permanent decisions. It was practical and sensible, even if every fiber of Quinn's being wanted to marry her immediately and never let her out of his sight again. On the 6th day, Doc Morrison rode out to check on his patient and declared himself amazed at her progress. The cuts on her legs were healing cleanly, and while the ankle would take time, Kira was already able to put a little weight on it with Quinn's support. Morrison also brought news from the outside world. The Stagecoach company had sent men to retrieve the bodies and the wreckage, and they wanted to talk to Kira about what had happened. Quinn rode back to the settlement with Morrison to meet with them. The company agent, a thin man named Garrison with calculating eyes, asked endless questions about the accident. Had the driver been drinking? Had there been any sign of trouble before the crash? Quinn answered as best he could, explaining that he had arrived after the fact and found only the aftermath. When Garrison started implying that perhaps Kira had done something to cause the accident, Quinn's temper flared. That woman was trapped under a wrecked coach with a broken ankle and more courage than any man I have ever met, he said coldly. If you are trying to blame her for your company's failure to maintain safe equipment and roads, you can think again. Garrison backed down quickly, perhaps sensing that Quinn was not a man to cross, and the interview ended with assurances that the company would take care of all expenses related to Kira's injuries. Quinn did not trust him an inch, but accepted the small payment Garrison offered for Kira's lost belongings and the trauma she had endured. It was not much, but it was something. When Quinn returned to the cabin, he found Kira sitting at the table for the first time, her splinted leg propped on the other chair, working on a piece of embroidery she had started using supplies Morrison's late wife had left behind. She looked up when he entered, her face brightening in a way that made Quinn's chest ache with tenderness. "The Stagecoach company wants to make sure you are all right," he said, setting the money on the table. "They are concerned about their liability more than your welfare, but at least they paid something." Kira barely glanced at the coins. "I do not care about their money. Did you get what you needed from the trading post?" Quinn held up a package. "New stockings, since yours were destroyed. A dress that should fit you well enough, though it is plain. And this." He pulled out a smaller bundle and unwrapped it to reveal a pair of ladies' boots, sturdy but with a bit of decorative stitching, "for when you are ready to walk again." Kira's eyes went wide and she reached out to touch the boots with trembling fingers. "Quinn, these must have cost a fortune. You should not have." "You are going to need boots," he said simply. "And I wanted you to have something nice, something that was just yours." She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, and Quinn quickly closed the distance between them, kneeling beside her chair. "Hey, I did not mean to make you cry." "I am crying because I am happy," Kira said, laughing through her tears. "Nobody has ever done something like this for me before. My father gave me expensive things, but they were always about appearances, about what other people would think. You bought me boots because you wanted me to have them, because you care about me." Quinn wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. "I more than care about you, Kira. I love you. I know we said we would take our time, be sensible about this, but I cannot pretend I feel any different than I do." "I love you too," Kira said, her voice strong and sure. "I think I started falling in love with you when you were carrying me up that slope, when you told me to hold on. I could hear in your voice that you were not going to let me die, that you would do whatever it took to save me. Nobody has ever fought for me like that before." Quinn kissed her then, pouring everything he felt into it, all the love and hope and fierce protectiveness that had been building since that first moment he found her in the wreckage. When they finally broke apart, he rested his hand over her heart, feeling it beat strong and steady beneath his palm. "Marry me," he said. "Not someday, not when the time is right. Now, as soon as we can. I want you to be my wife. I want to build that life we talked about together." Kira covered his hand with hers. "Yes, yes, I will marry you. But what about my teaching contract? What about being practical and sensible?" "We will figure it out," Quinn said. "Maybe we settle near Circleville so you can still teach if you want. Maybe we find land somewhere else, and you teach in whatever town is closest. I do not care about the details as long as we are together." They talked late into the night, making real plans now, no longer tentative or conditional. Quinn had enough saved for a small down payment on land, and Kira's teaching salary, modest as it was, would help them build a herd. It would not be easy, but they were both used to hard work and hardship. What mattered was that they would face it together. 2 days later, Doc Morrison cleared Kira to travel as long as she took it slow and kept her leg elevated. Quinn carefully loaded her into the buckboard, surrounded by blankets and pillows, and they set out for Circleville. The journey took most of the day, moving at a pace that would not jar her healing ankle too badly, but Kira never complained. She seemed content just to be out in the open air, watching the red rock landscape roll past, Quinn's solid presence on the seat beside her. They reached Circleville as the sun was setting, painting the small town golden. It was barely more than a collection of buildings clustered along a single main street, with farms and ranches spreading out in all directions, but it looked welcoming in the warm light. Quinn drove straight to the town's only boarding house, run by a widow named Mrs. Fletcher, who took one look at Kira's splinted leg and immediately bustled into action. "You poor dear," she said, helping Quinn get Kira inside and settled in a room on the ground floor. "What happened to you?" Kira explained about the stagecoach accident, while Mrs. Fletcher clucked sympathetically and brought tea and fresh bread. When she learned that Kira was the new school teacher, her attitude shifted from merely sympathetic to actively protective. "The school board has been beside themselves wondering what happened to you," she said. "You were supposed to arrive over a week ago. I will send my boy to let them know you are here." Within an hour, 3 members of the school board had assembled in Mrs. Fletcher's parlor to meet with Kira. They were sympathetic about the accident but clearly anxious about when she could start teaching. The school had been without a teacher for months, and the children were falling behind. Quinn sat beside Kira, his hand holding hers, as she explained her injuries and the doctor's orders. "I can start in another 2 weeks," she said firmly. "My leg should be healed enough by then to stand and walk around a classroom, and I promise you I am worth the wait. In the meantime, if someone can bring me the books and lesson plans, I can start preparing." The board members looked at each other, then at the joined hands of Kira and Quinn, clearly trying to figure out the relationship. Finally, the eldest, a man named Walter Davies, spoke up. "Miss Owens, we hired you on the understanding that you were a single woman of good character. We need to know what your situation is with this gentleman." Quinn felt Kira's hand tighten in his, and he squeezed back reassuringly. Before she could speak, he addressed Davies directly. "My name is Quinn Holbrook, and I am the man who pulled Miss Owens from the wreckage of that stagecoach. I have been caring for her while she healed because she had nobody else. My intentions toward her are completely honorable. In fact, we are planning to be married as soon as arrangements can be made." A murmur went through the small group. Davies frowned. "Married? But you have only known each other a week or so." "Sometimes a week is long enough to know what your heart wants," Quinn said steadily. "But if it is a concern for the board, Kira can continue teaching through the spring term as planned. Many married women teach after all." "Not in Circleville," Davies said. "Our policy has always been that female teachers must be unmarried. It is considered unseemly otherwise." Kira's face went pale, and Quinn felt anger rising in his chest. "That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. Teaching is teaching, married or not." "Nevertheless, those are our terms," Davies said stiffly. "If Miss Owens wishes to marry, she will have to forfeit the position." The room fell silent. Quinn looked at Kira, trying to read her expression. He knew how important teaching was to her, how much she needed to feel like she was making a difference. He would not ask her to give that up for him, no matter how much he wanted to marry her, but Kira surprised him. She sat up straighter, her chin lifting with determination. "Then I forfeit the position. I appreciate the opportunity, gentlemen, but I will not accept conditions that force me to choose between marriage and meaningful work. It is an unjust policy, and I want no part of it." Davies sputtered, his face reddening. "Now, Miss Owens, let's not be hasty. Perhaps we could make an exception." "No," Kira said firmly. "I will not be the exception that proves your unjust rule. Find another teacher, one who will accept your terms. I have better things to do with my life." The board members left in a huff, and as soon as they were gone, Kira slumped back against the pillows, looking exhausted and shaken. Quinn pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I am sorry," he said. "I did not mean to cost you your job." "You did not cost me anything," Kira said fiercely. "They did with their stupid rules. Besides, I meant what I said. I am not going to let them dictate my life." Mrs. Fletcher, who had been hovering in the doorway, stepped forward. "If you do not mind my saying so, you two make a fine couple." My late husband and I had 40 good years together, and I can spot real love when I see it. Do not let small-minded people like Walter Davies make you doubt yourselves." Her words were a balm to Quinn's worried heart. He looked at Kira, seeing his own feelings reflected in her eyes. "We will figure something out," he promised. "Maybe there is another town nearby that needs a teacher and has more sense. Or maybe we find a different way for you to make a difference." Kira nodded, but Quinn could see the disappointment in her face, the dream deferred. He made a silent vow then that he would do everything in his power to give her a life worth having, to make sure she never regretted choosing him over that teaching position. Over the next few days, Quinn explored Circleville and the surrounding area, looking for opportunities. He talked to ranchers about work, to farmers about land for sale, to anyone who would give him the time of day. Most of the locals were friendly enough, though wary of strangers, and several expressed sympathy for what had happened to the Stagecoach passengers. It was during one of these conversations at the general store that Quinn met a man named Robert Tate, who owned a medium-sized ranch about 5 miles outside town. Tate was in his 50s, weathered and hard-working, with the kind of direct gaze that Quinn appreciated. They fell into conversation about cattle prices and grass conditions, and when Quinn mentioned he was looking to buy land, Tate's interest sharpened. "Funny you should say that," Tate said. "I have been thinking about selling off the north section of my property. It is about 200 acres, has a good creek running through it and decent grass. There is even an old homestead cabin that needs work but is still standing. I am getting too old to manage all my land properly, and my sons have no interest in ranching. They all moved to the city." Quinn's pulse quickened. "What would you want for it?" Tate named a price that was just barely within the realm of possibility if Quinn used all his savings and took on some debt. They haggled for a while, as was expected, and finally settled on terms that included Quinn working for Tate for the next year to help offset the cost. It was not ideal, but it was a chance at the dream Quinn had been chasing his whole adult life. He raced back to the boarding house to tell Kira, taking the stairs 2 at a time despite Mrs. Fletcher's protests about disturbing the other guests. He burst into Kira's room to find her sitting in a chair by the window, her splinted leg propped up, reading a book. She looked up with a startled laugh. "What has gotten into you, land?" Quinn said breathlessly, dropping to his knees beside her chair. "I found land, Kira. 200 acres with water and grass and a cabin. It needs a lot of work, but it could be ours. It could be our home." Kira's eyes went wide and she set down her book with shaking hands. "Tell me everything." Quinn described his conversation with Tate, the details of the land and the financial arrangements. "It will be hard," he warned. "I will be working for Tate most days to pay off what we owe, and you will be alone at the cabin a lot. We will be starting with almost nothing, just a few head of cattle that I can buy with what is left after the down payment. It will take years to build a real herd, to make the ranch profitable." "I do not care," Kira said, her voice shaking with emotion. "It will be ours, Quinn. Our land, our home, our life. I grew up with everything money could buy, and I was miserable. I would rather be poor and happy with you than rich and alone." Quinn kissed her then, hard and deep, pouring all his love and gratitude and fierce joy into it. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "We should get married first before we move out there, make it official." "Yes," Kira agreed. "How soon can we arrange it?" "There is a minister here in town. I met him yesterday. If you are well enough to stand for a short ceremony, we could do it tomorrow." Kira laughed, the sound like bells ringing. "Tomorrow sounds perfect." They were married the next afternoon in Mrs. Fletcher's parlor, with the widow and her son as witnesses and the local minister officiating. Kira wore the simple dress Quinn had bought her, with her auburn hair pinned up, and a small bouquet of dried flowers Mrs. Fletcher provided. Quinn wore his cleanest shirt and trousers, his hair slicked back and his face freshly shaved. The ceremony was brief and simple, but when Quinn slipped a plain gold band onto Kira's finger and kissed her as his wife, he felt like the richest man in the world. That night, in the small room at the boarding house, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left them both shaken and transformed. Quinn was infinitely gentle with Kira, mindful of her still healing injuries, and she welcomed him with a wholehearted trust that humbled him. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Quinn stroked her hair while she traced patterns on his chest. "I never knew it could be like this," Kira whispered. "My friends back in Philadelphia used to talk about their husbands, about the marriage bed, and they always made it sound like a duty to be endured. But this was not duty. This was joy." Quinn pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "It will always be joy with us. I promise you that." They spent one more week in Circleville while Kira's ankle healed enough for her to walk with just a cane, and then Quinn borrowed a wagon from Tate, and they moved out to their new property. The cabin was even rougher than the line shack had been, with gaps in the chinking that let wind whistle through and a roof that clearly leaked, but Kira surveyed it with shining eyes. "It is perfect," she declared, and Quinn knew she meant it. They spent the next weeks working from dawn to dusk, repairing the cabin, clearing brush, preparing for the small herd of cattle Quinn would buy in the spring. Kira proved to be stronger and more capable than Quinn had dared hope, throwing herself into the work despite her lingering limp. She patched the roof, mixed and applied new chinking, helped Quinn build a chicken coop and a smokehouse. In the evenings, exhausted and dirty, they would collapse together in front of the fireplace and talk about their dreams for the future. Quinn worked for Robert Tate 3 days a week, learning more about ranching in the Utah Territory and earning the money they needed to survive. Tate was a good teacher and a fair man, and he and his wife Martha took a liking to the young couple. Martha, in particular, took Kira under her wing, teaching her practical skills like canning and soap making, and how to treat common ailments with herbs since the nearest doctor was a day's ride away. Winter settled over the land, cold but not brutal, and Quinn and Kira learned what it meant to depend on each other completely. When Quinn came down with a fever, Kira nursed him back to health with the skills Martha had taught her, sitting beside him through long nights and bathing his forehead with cool cloths. When Kira had nightmares about the Stagecoach accident, waking up screaming about being trapped, Quinn held her until she calmed and whispered reassurances until she fell back asleep. They also learned the rhythms of married life, the small intimacies and inside jokes, the way their bodies fit together perfectly, the comfort of waking up next to someone who knew and loved every part of you. Quinn had never been happier, and he could see the same contentment in Kira's eyes every time she looked at him. Christmas came, and Martha Tate insisted they come to the main ranch for dinner. It was the first time Kira had been off their property since they moved in, and Quinn watched her blossom in the company of others, her natural intelligence and wit making her a delightful guest. The Tates had invited several other ranch families, and Quinn noticed that Kira particularly engaged with the children, telling them stories and helping them with a puzzle. Later, as they drove home under a sky full of stars, she was quiet and thoughtful. "What are you thinking about?" Quinn asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I miss teaching," Kira admitted. "I know I said I was fine with giving it up, and I do not regret marrying you for a second, but I miss working with children, miss feeling like I was helping shape young minds." Quinn thought about this for a moment. "What if you started a small school on our property? just for the children of the surrounding ranches. Most of them do not get much formal education because the town school is too far away. You could teach them a few hours a week, and their parents could pay you with goods or labor instead of cash. Kira turned to look at him, her eyes wide. Do you think people would be interested? I think you should ask. The worst they can say is no. Over the next weeks, Kira wrote letters to the families they had met at Christmas, proposing her idea. The response was overwhelmingly positive. By early February, she had commitments from 5 families to send their children 2 afternoons a week for lessons. Quinn helped her convert one corner of their cabin into a small schoolroom, with a chalkboard he bought from the general store and benches he built himself. Watching Kira's face light up as she prepared lessons and organized books, Quinn felt a deep satisfaction. He had helped her find a way to do what she loved, to make the difference she had always wanted to make. The first day of Kira's school was chaotic and wonderful. 8 children ranging in age from 6 to 13 crowded into the cabin, nervous and excited. Quinn observed from a distance, mending fence nearby, and could hear Kira's patient voice explaining mathematics and reading passages of literature aloud. When the children left, chattering about what they had learned, their parents thanked Kira with fresh eggs, a smoked ham, and promises of help with spring planting. That night, Kira practically glowed with happiness. It was perfect, she told Quinn as they lay in bed. Everything I hoped it would be. Those children are hungry to learn, and I get to feed that hunger. Thank you for suggesting it. You did all the hard work, Quinn said, pulling her close. I just planted the seed. As winter faded into spring, life on the ranch became a beautiful rhythm of hard work and deep contentment. Quinn bought 6 head of cattle from Tate, the beginning of their herd, and spent long days building fences and improving the grazing land. Kira taught her school twice a week and managed the household the rest of the time, gradually transforming the rough cabin into a real home with curtains on the windows and herbs growing in a small garden. They were exhausted most nights, but it was the good exhaustion of meaningful work, of building something that mattered. In April, Kira started feeling ill in the mornings, and it took her a few weeks to realize what it meant. When she finally told Quinn she thought she might be pregnant, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. They rode to Doc Morrison the next week to confirm it, and he calculated that the baby would come in late November or early December. The pregnancy was not easy. Kira was sick for months, and Quinn worried constantly about her, though she kept insisting she was fine. He took over more of the household chores, cooking meals and doing laundry in addition to his ranch work, determined that Kira should rest as much as possible. Martha Tate visited regularly, bringing practical advice and reassurance that everything Kira was experiencing was normal. By summer, Kira's stomach had swelled noticeably, and she had to stop teaching her school. The children and their parents brought gifts of baby clothes and blankets, and several of the ranch wives promised to be there for the birth. Quinn found himself torn between excitement and terror at the thought of becoming a father. He spent his evenings talking to the baby through Kira's stomach, telling stories and making promises about the life they would have together. "What if I am not a good father?" he asked Kira one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her belly. "What if I make mistakes?" Kira covered his hand with hers. "All parents make mistakes, but you have the most important thing already, a heart full of love. That is what matters." The baby came on a cold December night, almost exactly a year after Quinn had found Kira broken and bleeding in that Stagecoach wreckage. Martha Tate and 2 other ranch wives attended the birth, along with Doc Morrison, who had ridden out as soon as he got word Kira's labor had started. Quinn paced outside the cabin for hours, listening to Kira's cries and feeling utterly helpless. When Martha finally came out to tell him he had a son, Quinn's knees nearly buckled with relief. He went inside to find Kira propped up in bed, exhausted and pale but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up when Quinn approached, and the love in her eyes nearly stopped his heart. "Meet your son," she said softly, pulling back the blanket to reveal a red, wrinkled little face with a surprising amount of dark hair. "I was thinking we could name him Joseph, after my father. Despite everything, he did love me in his own way." Quinn carefully took the baby from her, cradling him with the same tenderness he had shown Kira that first day. The infant opened his eyes, dark blue like all newborns, and Quinn felt something shift fundamentally in his chest. This was his son, his family, his whole world contained in this tiny life and the woman who had given birth to him. "Joseph Holbrook," he said, testing the name. "It is perfect." The winter months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder as Quinn and Kira learned to be parents. Little Joseph was a healthy baby with strong lungs and an impressive appetite, keeping them both exhausted but happy. Quinn discovered that he loved fatherhood, loved the weight of his son in his arms, loved watching Kira nurse him and sing lullabies. The ranch work continued, but it took a backseat to the miracle of their growing family. By spring, Joseph was sitting up and babbling, and Kira was ready to restart her school. She set up a cradle in the schoolroom corner where Joseph could nap while she taught, and the children who came for lessons were delighted to have a baby to coo over during breaks. Quinn watched his wife juggle teaching and motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything, and his love for her only deepened. The ranch continued to grow slowly but steadily. Quinn bought more cattle as they could afford them, gradually building a herd that would eventually make them financially stable. Tate helped with advice and access to good breeding stock, and other ranchers in the area began to respect Quinn as a serious cattleman rather than an outsider. It was hard work and sometimes felt impossibly slow, but they were making progress. When Joseph was 18 months old, Kira discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she was able to teach almost until the day their daughter was born in early fall of 1876. They named her Rose for her pink cheeks and the wild roses that grew along their creek. Joseph, now a sturdy toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything, which was both adorable and exhausting. The years rolled on, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Quinn and Kira's ranch gradually became one of the most respected in the area, not huge but well managed and profitable. Their herd grew to over 100 head, enough that they could hire occasional help during busy times. Kira's school expanded to include more families, and she became known throughout the region as an excellent teacher. Several of her students went on to attend university, an unusual achievement for rural children, and she took fierce pride in their success. Joseph grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working alongside his father and learning everything he could about ranching. Rose was more outgoing and adventurous, always climbing trees and exploring, giving Quinn gray hairs with her fearlessness. 2 more children followed, a second son they named Thomas, and another daughter they named Clara. The cabin expanded to accommodate the growing family, with additional rooms built on as they could afford them. Through it all, Quinn and Kira's love only grew stronger. They still stole moments alone when they could, riding out to their favorite spot by the creek to watch the sunset, talking about their dreams and memories. Quinn never forgot the moment he found her in that wreckage, broken and in pain, and how his whole life had changed in an instant. Kira never forgot his words the first day, about being meant to find her broken so he could help put her back together. It had proven prophetic in ways neither of them could have imagined. They had healed each other, had built a life and a family out of tragedy and coincidence and love. One evening in the fall of 1890, Quinn and Kira sat on the porch of their now substantial house, watching the sun paint the Utah sky in shades of orange and purple. Their children were inside, the older ones helping the younger with homework, the sound of their voices and laughter drifting through the open windows. Joseph, now 17, was already talking about wanting to expand the ranch further. Rose, at 15, had announced her intention to become a doctor, inspired by the times Doc Morrison had come to treat various family injuries over the years. Thomas and Clara were still young, full of energy and mischief. "Can you believe it has been 17 years since the accident?" Kira said softly, leaning against Quinn's shoulder. Quinn put his arm around her, pulling her close. She was 41 now, with strands of silver threading through her auburn hair and lines around her eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to him, she was as beautiful as the day he found her. More so, actually, because now he knew every expression on her face, every thought in her head, every beat of her generous heart. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Quinn said. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. But I am grateful every single day that I happened to be riding through that canyon at exactly that moment." "Not just happened to be," Kira said, tilting her face up to look at him. "You were meant to be there. We were meant to find each other." "Maybe I was meant to find you broken," Quinn said, echoing his words from that first day, "so I could be the one to help put you back together." "And I was meant to find you lonely," Kira added, "so I could be the one to give you a home and a family and a reason to stay in one place." Quinn kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that contained 17 years of love and partnership and mutual devotion. When they broke apart, Kira rested her head on his chest, and they sat together in peaceful silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Their life was not perfect. They had faced hardships over the years, droughts that killed cattle, harsh winters that tested their endurance, illness and injury that reminded them how fragile life could be. But they had faced it all together, and that made all the difference. Quinn had found land and built a successful ranch, achieving the dream he had carried since childhood. Kira had found meaningful work and a loving family, healing the wounds of her lonely upbringing. But more than any of that, they had found each other, two broken people who had somehow managed to make each other whole. Inside the house, someone started playing the piano they had bought 2 years ago, and Rose's clear voice rose in song. The other children joined in, their voices blending in slightly off-key but heartfelt harmony. Quinn felt Kira smile against his chest, felt the contentment radiating from her, and knew his own heart was mirroring hers. This was what they had built together, this life full of love and laughter and hard work and deep satisfaction. It had started with a moment of chance or fate or divine intervention, when a cowboy riding through a canyon had heard a crash and investigated, when he had pulled a broken woman from wreckage and made her a promise to take care of her. From that single moment, everything else had flowed, a river of possibility that had carried them both to shores they had never imagined. As the years continued to pass, Quinn and Kira grew old together with grace and gratitude. They saw their children grow up and start families of their own, watched grandchildren arrive and fill their home with new noise and chaos. Joseph took over the ranch and expanded it exactly as he had promised, becoming one of the most successful cattlemen in the territory. Rose did indeed become a doctor, one of the first women in Utah to achieve that distinction, and returned to the area to practice medicine. Thomas became a teacher, inspired by his mother's passion for education, and Clara married a rancher from a neighboring property and stayed close to home. Through it all, Quinn and Kira remained the foundation of their family, the example their children and grandchildren looked to for what real love looked like. They still sat on their porch every evening when weather permitted, still stole kisses when they thought nobody was looking, still held hands as they walked through the property they had built together. Quinn Holbrook died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 74, with Kira beside him as she had been for nearly 50 years. She held his hand until his last breath, then continued holding it for hours afterward, unable to let go of the man who had saved her life and given her everything worth having. When she finally did release him, she whispered the words he had said to her on their wedding day, a promise he had kept faithfully for half a century. It was always joy with us, always. Kira Owens Holbrook lived another 5 years after Quinn's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, teaching lessons to great-grandchildren, and tending the roses that grew wild along the creek. She never remarried, never wanted to, because she had been blessed with a love that most people never found even once, and she knew she would never find it again. She was buried beside Quinn in a small cemetery on their property, beneath the Utah sky that had witnessed their whole life together. Their joint headstone bore both their names and a simple inscription that Joseph chose, words his father had spoken on the day he rescued his mother from a stagecoach wreck and changed both their lives forever. Maybe I was meant to find you broken, so I could help put you back together. But beneath that, in smaller letters, Kira's children added their mother's response, the words she had spoken so many times over the years when telling the story of how she and Quinn met. And I was meant to find you lonely, so I could give you a home. Together, those words told the story of a love that had started with tragedy and grown into something beautiful and enduring, a love that had built not just a ranch, but a legacy that would continue for generations. It was a love that proved sometimes the most broken moments lead to the most beautiful beginnings, and sometimes the person who saves your life becomes the person you were meant to spend that life with. The ranch still stands, run now by Quinn and Kira's great-great-grandchildren, and the roses still grow wild along the creek. And if you visit on a quiet evening when the sun is setting, and the sky is painted in shades of orange and purple, locals say you can sometimes see 2 figures sitting on the old porch, holding hands and watching the stars emerge, still together, even in the place where all things eventually return to dust. Because some loves are too strong to be contained by a single lifetime, some promises too sacred to be broken even by death, and some souls too perfectly matched to ever truly be apart. The story of Quinn Holbrook and Kira Owens became legend in southern Utah, told and retold at family gatherings and community events, an example of how love could bloom in the most unexpected places and survive anything life threw at it. It was a story that gave hope to the lonely and broken, that reminded people that sometimes disaster was just the universe's way of pushing you toward your destiny, that the worst day of your life could become the first day of something beautiful. And it all started with a cowboy riding through a canyon, hearing a crash, and making the choice to investigate rather than ride past. A choice that saved a life, yes, but also changed one, gave meaning to 2, and eventually created an entire family tree of people who would never have existed if not for that single moment when Quinn Holbrook found Kira Owens broken in a stagecoach wreck and decided she was worth saving. Maybe some would call it chance or luck or coincidence, but Quinn and Kira knew better. They knew it was fate, destiny, the hand of something greater than themselves, bringing two souls together who needed each other more than they had ever known. And they were grateful for it every single day of their long, love-filled lives together, building a legacy that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the power of love to heal and transform and create something beautiful out of broken pieces.